Balakun, a bridge to Ukraine. Join the conversation at balakun.co.
Балакун – міст в Україну. Долучайтесь до наших розмов на www.balakun.co.
Please subscribe!
Hi, welcome. And we are so happy to have our first guest on the podcast. Vit, are you excited for our first guest?
I'm very excited.
Very excited. We have Daniel Broomfield, who is the director of Redwood Online English School, and he has been living in Ukraine for 10 years, he just told me. Would you like to introduce yourself, Daniel?
Yeah, so good morning. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So as you've said, I'm the director of Redwood Online School of English, but I've been living and working for 10 years in Ukraine, 4 years in Odessa, 4 years in Kyiv, and then now when I'm in Ukraine, I should say, I live in Lutsk in the northwest of the country, and I've been there for 2 years now. My entire life has been around teaching English, and most of my adult life has been spent in Ukraine, as it is.
Yeah. So have you always been a teacher, or did you have a?
I have. Yeah. I've always been working as a teacher. So I studied French at university. Was my degree, and I did my CELTA immediately after finishing university, and then I went to Italy to live for a year. And Italy is a very wonderful country. Like it's a very nice place to be, but I was TEFL salaries aren't particularly high in Italy, and so I wasn't able to have perhaps quite the life I'd anticipated living there. And then I saw a job offer for Ukraine, and just thought, why not? I know nothing about this country. I know, I wanted something different anyway. Like I wanted sort of new people, new language, new culture, sort of everything. And I only planned to stay for a year, and then I just sort of fell in love with the country and with the culture. And 10 years later, like I'm still have a home there. So I'm very, very fortunate to have been, to be part of that.
On the first episode, we talked about perceptions of Ukraine and how Ukraine is worldwide known. What was your perception before first visit in Ukraine?
Honestly, I knew very little about Ukraine at this time. So I moved to Ukraine in 2013. In the summer, it was in August 2013, and before then, I knew, basically nothing. I mean, I knew that I knew the capital was Kyiv. I knew that I knew a little bit about the history, obviously, of the occupation of Ukraine by the Soviet Union. But other than that, I didn't really know very much. And this was kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to go, was because I wanted to experience a culture in a country that I didn't know anything about, that was completely new to me. I mean, as you said, nowadays, obviously, people do know a lot about Ukraine unfortunately, for very sort of very, very, very sad reasons. But at that time, my knowledge was extremely limited before I first came to the country. So it was a very
culture shock.
It was a bit of a culture shock. I mean, when I first arrived in Odessa, the whole sort of like language was a really big problem for me for my first few months, because I didn't speak. I mean, at that time, Odessa was extremely Russian speaking, and I didn't know either language really. I wasn't able to speak anything. So the first couple of months were quite a challenge to adapt to the culture and to the country. But I did change. I did adapt, and I had a very positive experience, and I still do. I think when I'm in Ukraine, it's wonderful.
What impressed you the most that time when you moved?
I think Odessa particularly, it just had everything for me when I was there. The city is just such a wonderful place. Like the people are fantastic. You've got marvelous beaches and countryside around. The food is excellent, and I was just kind of, from somebody who came from sort of a slightly more I don't, the area where I lived when I was a child, for example, it wasn't particularly sort of multicultural. It was very kind of sort of simple English, simple British. And then coming to this place where it was almost like sort of a melting pot of a city with lots of different people from different places, and the whole a kind of variety of what was available in Odessa, it really had a very strong effect on me. I mean, I've had the privilege of visiting many cities in Ukraine during my time, but Odessa will always be kind of like the most special place for me, because it was my introduction to Ukraine, and yeah, it was my first home in Ukraine, so it was always
your first
it
time.
will always be a very special place to me. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
So let's take a little break to talk about some news this week, and Vit is going to talk about some heavy dark news, and I'm going to talk about some happy news. You can go
I'll
first.
just stick to happy news myself also.
You're going to stick to happy news as well. Okay.
Yeah, it's on the 6th of December, a Christmas tree was planted in the center of Kiev. And the lights of main Christmas tree have been turned on St. Sophia Square, and the theme of today's Christmas tree is Brave Hearts. And the Christmas tree itself was funded entirely by charity donors, and no state money was spent on it. I have a quote from Mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, and the quote is, "Today, following tradition, on St. Nicholas Day, the main Christmas tree of the country was lit up in St. Sophia Square in Kiev. Our Christmas tree, like last year, is an artificial one, 12 meters high. Its installation and decoration were funded by sponsors." That's what Mayor tells. And each year after Maidan, the Christmas tree was moved from Maidan itself to St. Sophia, near St. Sophia Cathedral. Before that, every year the Christmas tree was planted on Maidan, and during the Revolution of Dignity, it was covered with all that banners with all the mottos that were very important for that revolution.
Interesting. Has it put everyone in a good mood, in a Christmassy mood?
Not everyone. I think that we try to have a bit of Christmas mood despite the nightmare that's going on. Like we are forcing ourselves to make some things normal, to feel a bit more alive that we could be.
Yeah. I think we should call this segment Vit and Sandy's Good News of the Week. Because there's so much darkness on the internet.
Yeah, and so having too much nightmare around, we can stick to something good and something positive. Yeah. As it's very important.
My good news story of the week, an Ivy bag for disasters that doesn't need gravity. So these South Korean student inventors have been awarded the 2023 James Dyson Award for an air pressure controlled IV bag that will allow rescuers in disaster situations much more flexibility when administering life-saving fluids and drugs. So basically it's an IV bag that you don't have to hold up. You know how if you're moving a patient, you have to hold the IV bag up in the air so that gravity makes it work. So this is called the Golden Capsule, a non-powered, hands-free IV device that uses elastic forces and air pressure differences rather than gravity. This means that medics in disaster zones do not have to hold up IV bags while transporting patients, and electricity is not required to control the infusion rate.
It might be very helpful.
The team will continue to conduct prototype improvements and user tests in collaboration with medical experts. So these are all students at I think they look like university students. So that's my good news of the week. Which is harder to learn, do you think, English or Ukrainian?
Oh, well, that's a big question. So it's kind of hard to say, because so much depends on where you are coming from in terms of your native language. I mean, yeah, as all of us are aware, I think English is an extremely complicated language. I mean, there are so many different things for students they have to remember, and then you give students rules, and then it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
by
we
the
don't
way,
follow
there's
any of the rules.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's so many exceptions, and people don't actually do this, and people break them. And I think the number of exceptions in English, and particularly as well, I think the use of articles is a real problem in my experience for Ukrainian speakers, because obviously in the Ukrainian language there are no articles, they don't exist as a concept. And so especially for that, I think is extremely challenging. But and at the same time, if we look at the Ukrainian language, there are also a huge number of rules within Ukrainian which are extremely complicated for foreigners to learn and to try and master. I mean, I've been studying Ukrainian now for 4 or 5 years, and if we look, for example, at what's called Vidminovanie Chislivnikov, which is the how numbers are changed depending on what grammatical role they are playing in the sentence, I still have incredible problems trying to build sentences in the right way, because there are just so many, like, for example, for the number one, there are so many different words for the number one, or different forms of the word depending on exactly what you're trying to say, and it's very difficult sometimes to get it right. So I think it's hard to say that one language is necessarily more difficult than the other, but certainly both languages do have kind of very they do pose a lot of difficulties for people who are studying the language, I would say.
Yeah.
So,
And how long have you studied Ukrainian so far?
so it's been about about 4 or 5 years already. I guess maybe 5 years actually, because when I lived in Odessa, I started learning Russian for 2 reasons. First of all, I was told by people there that Odessa is a Russian-speaking city, and it was almost kind of like offensive to speak Ukrainian in Odessa, which very sadly I believed at that time. But also because it was very unusual to hear Ukrainian anywhere in Odessa at that moment. Like, menus were in Russian or in English, and so I studied it for a couple of years in total. But then when I moved to Kyiv, people started communicating to me in Ukrainian, and things were written in Ukrainian, and it was kind of almost embarrassing, really, that I had lived in this country for a few years by that point, and I still couldn't really understand or communicate in anything. So I decided to start learning Ukrainian from that point on, and I've forgotten almost everything in Russian now. I can still remember a few words here and there, but Ukrainian has completely replaced it because it's my normal language of communication now. My wife is Ukrainian. She's a Ukrainian speaker. Her family are all Ukrainian speaking. So it's kind of like the only sort of regular language that I use nowadays. And yeah, and it does help living in that environment, I guess, too.
So your method of learning Ukrainian was a total immersion into, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful. I mean, I know that obviously not everybody has the opportunity to do this, but throwing yourself just into the culture and into the language, yeah, you're going to make mistakes, but so what? That's how we learn new things. And having this sort of total immersion, yeah, into the culture, into music, into TV, into film, it does have a really sort of powerful effect, let's say, on the way that I was able to learn the language. But it's also out of necessity as well, because again, like in Lutsk, where I live now, for example, it's that's pretty much always been, since I've been there, it's always been Ukrainian speaking, and I need it to communicate. So it's kind of like it's a requirement almost more than anything else for me.
All right. Are you ready for your word?
Yeah, I'll take not very hard, but not very light word. It's the foreigner, inozemets.
Inozemets. Inozemets.
Inozemets.
Inozemets. Is it like a z at the end?
T. Like t, s, but in one sound, like more like a diphthong, but it's the separate sound. T.
Could you say it one more time?
Inozemets.
Inozemets. Inozemets.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, and it's palatalized. T.
Inozemets.
There's no palatalization in English, so it could be hard. T.
Inozemets. I think I'm overthinking it now. Inozemets.
Inozemets.
Inozemets. Inozemets.
Yeah, you can be yeah.
Inozemets.
Like we have this palatalization in Ukrainian, like you have t sound and t sound. You have n and n. So it's very common for Ukrainian, and it's not present in English, so it could be hard for non-Ukrainians or non-Slavic to
Or for
pronounce
inozemets.
this.
Okay, are you ready for your word? It's going to be great.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat.
Oh. Oh. Worcestershire.
That's really close. That's really close. Worcestershire. Worcestershire. I can't even say it. Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce.
Yeah, many people call it Worcestershire.
Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce.
Well, what advice would you give to Ukrainian language beginners? So for the people who are just starting to learn Ukrainian, as Ukrainian became very popular apparently on Duolingo platform and some others. And what was the most confusing when you started to learn it? And what advice could you give to those who want to learn it and striving?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it goes back to, I think the kind of the most important thing is not to be afraid to make mistakes, because so many people don't want to communicate in a language because they think that people will, they will laugh at them or make fun of them or whatever. And in my experience, particularly if we focus particularly on the Ukrainian language, people just aren't like that. People love it when you try and communicate in their native language, because I think especially for the Ukrainian language, which has had such a difficult history with lots of repression of the Ukrainian language and culture, that when a person tries to make a bit of an effort and just with some basic words and phrases, it makes such a difference, because I think it's almost like a recognition of like, you know, that there are people who are not Ukrainian who can speak this language to a certain extent. And I think it's a really powerful thing to be able to communicate with somebody in their native language. I would also say as well, just to add to this, that it can be very daunting starting with Ukrainian, because you've got this whole new alphabet, you've got this whole new way of communicating, the sentence structure is different, the grammatical structure is different, and
completely different sounds of letters as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It took me a couple of years before I could hear the difference all the time between the letters sh and sh, for example. That took me quite a while to get right, because it's very, I don't know, to my ears it was very, very hard to hear this difference. But I think, yeah, if you try and sort of do everything at the same time, it is going to be a bit of a disaster. But realizing that, again, it's okay to make mistakes, and that you will make progress if you study, if you practice, even if you feel like you're not going anywhere, you are still developing your knowledge at the same time. And I think just kind of taking this sort of slow and steady approach is a good way to be dealing with it, because you know, Ukrainian is such a complicated language. I mean, it's very, very hard to master even parts, and even Ukrainians themselves have difficulty sometimes with constructing Ukrainian. So I think you have to be sort of, take your time with it, I guess.
So on the flip side of that, what would you say to Ukrainians who want to practice English, for example, with a mentor at Balakun, but are afraid of making mistakes or afraid of the way their accent sounds or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of probably give similar advice in terms of mistakes, because, you know, you are going to make mistakes. That is just a fact. You know, you cannot avoid that. But my philosophy, and the way that as I mentioned before, and the way that I tell my students, is that if you make mistakes, that is a good thing, because you cannot progress unless you make mistakes. You need to learn that something is wrong before you can learn how to do it correctly. And again, you know, particularly within an environment like this, where you have a mentor, you have somebody who is there to help you, you know, they're not going to laugh at you. They're not going to make fun of you. That the whole purpose of this is to help you develop your knowledge of the language. And it is a very hard sort of kind of psychological barrier to go through of worrying about making mistakes. I know particularly a couple of Ukrainians who I know who've had very traumatic experiences in the Ukrainian school system, with how their teachers react to mistakes and get things wrong. But when you are within a kind of let's say a safer environment, let's call it like this, you have the opportunity to make mistakes and to be corrected and to understand why those mistakes are wrong. And that's such a wonderful opportunity to be able to do that. And the other thing as well, I would say, is that English is obviously a very, very widely spoken language. So at least if a person communicates with a native speaker of English, particularly like, for example, in Britain, in my country, we are very used to hearing a huge variety of accents. Not everybody, including native speakers, we don't all speak with, received pronunciation and perfect pronunciation of words. And so it's not going to be something unusual to us to hear people speak with an accent.
I've heard so many students say, how bad is my accent? And I'm like, what do you mean bad? It's your accent.
Yeah.
It's not good or bad.
There is, I feel like sometimes that there is kind of like this opinion that people should have, or certainly from students who I've had, they do have this opinion that there should be kind of like a British accent, let's say.
Queen's English.
Yeah, exactly, the Queen's English. But then it's like, but do you really want to speak like that? Because I mean, if you do, okay, fine. But like sort of only about 2 or 3% of British people have received pronunciation. I mean, I don't, and I have sort of standard Northern English accent, and there's nothing wrong. Having an accent is part, in my view, having an accent is part of your linguistic identity.
Yeah.
And if you want to speak in received pronunciation, then okay, that is your goal, and I'm not here to patronize that, but at the same time, having sort of a Ukrainian accent when you speak in English is part of who you are, and I don't think erasing that is necessarily something that is so essential in order to communicate well in English, or indeed in any other language, like getting rid of it. So I don't think it's something people worry about it too much, basically, I think is the way I see it.
Do you want to talk about?
I don't want us to be banned.
Yeah.
So let's stick to Kropyvnytsky meme.
Okay. So you're gonna have to describe
the description is really simple.
Okay.
If you imagine a Silent Hill movie, you see there is a scene where a girl enters Silent Hill, and there's a banner that tells "Welcome to Silent Hill," and the Silent Hill is substitute with Kropyvnytsky. And this meme is bound to the 29th of November, where there was a very thick fog in Kropyvnytsky. And I think that's the inhabitants of Kropyvnytsky made this meme. So Kropyvnytsky is very industrial city. And many people who live there, I've never been there. I believe that it's a great city. But many of people who live there tell that it's very industrial and very pessimistic, like Silent Hill is. So that's the bound to it.
Okay, so a thick fog descended on Kropyvnytsky.
Yeah.
So language itself is very common or very bound to a way of thinking, to mentality. And speaking of mentality, what have you noticed so far, and what even distracts you, or what pleases you in Ukrainian way of thinking? So like we have this common way of thinking, despite different regions and despite different history of the regions. We all have almost the same way of thinking. And what you like about it, or what distracts you?
Well, I mean, one thing certainly is that one of the positives that I've experienced living in Ukraine is that Ukrainians are generous to a fault. I mean, they are some of the most wonderful, hospitable people I have ever met. And sometimes it can be kind of quite disarming. Like, I know that if I go to one of my friends' houses in Lutsk, like I will come in, they will say, yeah, literally, like it's the exact conversation. Like, are you hungry? No. Okay, sit down. I'll make you some borscht. Like it happens every single time. And this is just something that I mean, it's wonderful. You know, it's a fantastic thing to be like this. At least from my perspective, because I get food everywhere I go. But at the same time, it's kind of like it's when I first came, it was quite unusual with how generous Ukrainians are in this respect, because it was just something that I really wasn't used to. But I mean, the Ukrainian mentality is obviously, I mean, it is very much shaped by history as well. I think, and because like Ukrainians, at least who I know, tend to be slightly more pessimistic in their outlook about life, which is kind of understandable, I think, because again of the history of the country. But the Ukrainian mentality, at least in terms of how they treat guests and people who visit them, it's just wonderful, and it's a real, you know, it's a privilege to be able to experience that. I think, you know, when being in Ukraine, it's a really wonderful thing, I have to say.
And speaking of it, of Ukrainian cuisine itself, how do you find it, and what's your favorite, and what you cannot accept or get used to?
Yeah, so there are many things that I love about Ukrainian food. Probably my favorite Ukrainian dish is borscht, but only red borscht. Green borscht I cannot eat. It's just absolutely horrible. But some red borscht with no, you use the Ukrainian word there, with sour cream, and there's also a small type of bread called pampushki, which we have with borscht as well, which I like very, very much.
With garlic.
Yeah, with garlic, it's just the best. But also one thing that I like is that obviously in different parts of Ukraine there are different types of food. So like in Odessa, for example, that like forshmak, for example, in the Carpathians, banosh from Crimea, cheboreki, which are wonderful. And you know, there is a very great diversity even within this one country of food. One thing that I don't like, I have to probably have to add here, is holodets. This is sort of meat in gelatin is probably the best way I can describe it. It looks a little bit like dog food to me, which is probably why I can't eat it. It's just I've never really enjoyed it, unfortunately.
But it can be really tasty.
Yeah, this is always the answer I get. Like whenever I say I don't like it, it's like, well, you need to try my grandmother's. You know, my grandmother makes very, very good.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I know for some people, I think it's quite difficult to accept that. Yeah, I don't like it necessarily. But yeah, but in general, I mean, the food is fantastic, and particularly in Odessa and in Kyiv. There are a huge variety of restaurants as well. I mean, not just Ukrainian food, but from Georgian cuisine as well, for example, which I like very much. And you're never short of a good restaurant to go to. Basically, there's always some nice places to visit.
So, is there anything you miss from the UK food-wise?
Not very much, to be honest with you, but that's because most British food is pretty terrible, which I should probably say quite quietly. It's not really that nice, you know. I mean, maybe the occasional fish and chips I might miss once in a while, but like at least when I lived here when I was growing up, if we ever went to a restaurant, it was always like an Italian restaurant we went to, or if we got a takeout, it would be Chinese or it would be Indian, and kind of like sort of British food itself is. Yeah, it's not great, so I can't really say that. I can't really say that I miss it that much, to be honest with you. Yeah. I miss actually one thing I do miss is British beer, because the way it's made in the UK it's not the same as it's brewed in Ukraine, generally speaking. So I do occasionally miss that, but that's probably about it, really. There's not a huge amount I miss about the UK when I'm not here. So yeah, that's probably about it. Yeah.
And if talking not about food or cuisine, what do you miss from Britain, Ukraine, or what lacks you?
Well, I mean, again, in Britain, there's not a huge amount that keeps me here, because after I finished university, I left the country. This was when I was 22. I left the UK to move to Italy, and all of my sort of adult life, I've lived abroad. In Italy for 1 year, and then the rest of my time in Ukraine. I mean, of course, I have my parents here, my brothers live here, and you know, I do miss them occasionally, of course, having family. But in terms of kind of like British sort of, you know, culture and things, there's not a huge amount that I really miss, to be honest with you, when I'm not here. But I think that is partly because of the fact that, yeah, I left so early in my adult life, and yeah, didn't really only really come back for summer and Christmas, and that's about it really. There's a lot of things that I miss though about Ukraine when I'm not there, but I think it's mainly just, again, because I've lived there for 10 years. It is just kind of the way of life and the culture.
Your new home.
And yeah, it's just, I do miss it. I'm just used to it, I think, more than anything. And it is, you know, I do miss it to a certain extent when I'm not here.
Can I ask, what do you find the most rewarding thing about teaching? Let's try and recruit some new mentors here.
Yeah, so teaching, so I have to start this by saying I never planned to become a teacher originally. I was originally planning to do a sort of interpreting or translating with French was my kind of original plan after I graduated from university. But then during my degree, I lived in France for a year teaching English to primary school and secondary school children. And it was just wonderful. It was just such a fantastic experience to have people, especially kids who are actually interested in what you had to say, who wanted to know what, you know, about life. And I think this is very much relevant to what to with your project, is the fact that you're going to have people who are extremely motivated, people who really want to learn the English language and culture of whichever country or the mentor is from. And I think that being able to share your knowledge and being able to help somebody to learn a foreign language, presumably, you know, if they have some kind of goal for, I don't know, getting a better job or for emigrating or whatever the purpose it might be, being able to help somebody do that it's just a wonderful, wonderful feeling. Like for me, for example, I also do like examination preparation and things like that for IELTS and so on. And when I get a message from a student to say like, yeah, you know, they've got the score that they needed, they're going to move to Canada, or they're going to go to the UK to study, that makes it all worthwhile, because it's just something where it's like, yeah, I've done this, I have helped somebody to get something better, and this person is, you know, hopefully going to be able to learn something, to do something that they want to do, and so everybody, you know, everybody wins basically. Yeah, you know, it's a wonderful thing to have.
Yeah. I'll never forget. I had someone who was practicing for a university entrance level test, and he sent me a message saying that even though he was most worried about it, he scored highest in the speaking part after we'd had a few sessions of talking about whatever it was that I managed to get him talking about. I think it was the TV show Breaking Bad. Found something that he wanted to talk about, and then he just started and wouldn't stop. Yeah. It's amazing when that happens as well, when you find the thing that someone really wants to talk about, and
and you will find this as well. I think, you know, some people can be a little bit some people I think can be a bit nervous communicating with people sometimes from other countries, or if they're from a community where, you know, it is just people from their country, and like, okay, what do I talk to this, you know, to this person about? But there will be something, and particularly I think for Ukrainians who by and large are generally interested in, you know, for example, if we talk like about Breaking Bad as an example, like American TV shows and films are extremely popular, you know, sports like football are very popular. And so you will find something to communicate on. And for some people, as you said, once you find this topic, suddenly everything just opens, and they just flow and can just talk and talk and talk and talk. And it's a wonderful thing when you make that connection with somebody, when you find out, yeah, this is, you know, this is where we are, and this is what we can discuss. It's great. So yeah.
Sorry, Vit, your turn. I'll give you a few turns.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about this very interesting topic. You are very popular on Ukrainian Twitter.
Yes.
And that's the point when I learned about you in the first place.
Right.
And you write mostly in Ukrainian, and many people confuse you with Ukrainian, and making you some awkward questions about it. Could you tell more about this experience being on Ukrainian Twitter and being in the middle of all the agenda that is on the Ukrainian Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, Ukrainian Twitter is a magnificent beast, because there are some wonderful people in Ukrainian Twitter, but also some very odd people at the same time as well, which I guess is to be expected with a large sort of social media thing. But yeah, I mean, I started it just to kind of sort of share my experiences about sort of being a foreigner in Ukraine, and just kind of like my experiences being there. And at the moment, unfortunately, there aren't many foreigners who speak Ukrainian. I mean, I'm still learning, obviously. I'm by no means a fluent speaker of Ukrainian, but you know, I can communicate my ideas in the language. And it was a very odd thing where it's suddenly like, yeah, people are just like accusing me of lying about my heritage, about like I'm actually Ukrainian. I've been accused of being a Russian secret agent. I've had lots of wild and wonderful accusations going on about, because for some people
That's how
it's
you
just
know you've made it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is when you get the accusations from the tinfoil hat wearers, that's when
Yeah.
you know you got to the right place. But it's a very odd feeling sometimes, though, for people. Like, some people just really find it very difficult to understand that, yeah, I am British, and yes, I have learned Ukrainian as a third language after French. And it's, I mean, again, the whole, in general, the Ukrainian Twitter community in general is very supportive. Like, it's kind of like, you know, they want to share their language. And I think that for some of them, you know, again, being able to communicate with a foreigner in their native language is an unusual experience, I would say. But yeah, it kind of all sort of snowballed very unexpectedly for the number of people who are now following me. I don't know the exact number already, but yeah, it's kind of like, I never expected that it would become this sort of, I know, this sort of experience, let's say, that it is now. But it's a wonderful thing, because I'm very happy to share my experiences, and also I share things about the English language and British culture in particular, which I try and share things that may be sort of less well known, or that people are not so aware about. And yeah, because it also helps to sort of share my culture a bit as well, because with most Ukrainians who I meet, a lot of them are more aware of, for example, American English, and for different sort of American culture and words and so on. And so it does allow me as well to kind of like say, so yeah, so in America they say, for example, restroom, but in British English we use loo, or we use toilet, or something like that, which was something that happened on Twitter yesterday. So it does allow sort of to give a more open perspective of that. Yeah, you know, there's not only one correct way to speak English, and yeah, it just gives the opportunity for people to discover more things about this as well, I think, which is,
And more context about why we do some of the strange things we do in English.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I try and open up open up a few, not secrets exactly, but like sort of why we do certain things, why we, you know, what's the point of articles, for example, or, you know, why flammable and inflammable mean the same thing, or something like that. But it's you know, there's always going to be, within like the confines of a tweet, it's always going to be very difficult to fully explain any concept, because there's so many different, you know, rules and exceptions and everything else. So I just try and, you know, do it as generally as I can, and if I can help somebody develop their knowledge, then that can only be a good thing, you know. That's, it makes me happy if I can do that. But yeah.
Okay, what's your interesting fact for this week?
My fact is about the longest trumpet of the world, is trombita. It's an alpine horn made of wood, and it is common among Ukrainian Highlanders, Hutsuls, who live in Western Ukraine, and it's less popular, but it's also present in Eastern Poland, Slovakia, and Northern Romania. This instrument, the sound of this instrument was present in Slana's Wild Dances, winning Eurovision in 2004.
Interesting.
This instrument is actually used not just for music, it is used as a mean of communication to let everyone know about such events like the beginning or ending of the working day, a birth of a child, marriage, or some danger, the upcoming danger. So its purpose is used more by shepherds to communicate with each other.
Over long distances.
Over long distances, and in mountains, some time ago, it was the only mean for communication. And the length of it is from 2.5 to 8 meters.
8
so
meters.
it's that 8 meters. It's
Wow.
that long. It's made of the wood of a spruce or pine, spruce mostly, And fruit itself is very, very common in Carpathian Mountains. And in Ukrainian, it's called smereka. There's also a song about smereka. And in other districts of Ukraine, you can hardly find it. So it's more Carpathian based plants.
I think there are some of those in that movie that I watched, Shadow of Forgotten Ancestors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's used there. Yeah.
So my interesting fact of the week is that New Zealand was the first country to give women the vote in the year 1893. And in 2022, women had the majority of seats in the New Zealand Parliament for the first time. So there were more women in Parliament than men for the first time in 2022. I've got another question here about how would you advise mentors to encourage students who are very shy about speaking English? Do you have any tips or anything to create a good environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think if a student is shy, in my experience, again, it comes back to two things. It's either because they obviously they maybe don't have much experience previously in communicating in a foreign language, which obviously is a very typical thing. Or again, going back to school, they've had such a traumatic experience of making mistakes that it's just kind of like they just really do not want to repeat that experience. And so I think that trying to set out the idea from a teacher's perspective to literally maybe even explain to the student that we're here to help, we're not here to judge. The whole point of this process is for us to be able to communicate and to help each other. I'm not gonna laugh at you. I'm not going to make fun of you. We are here to help. And I think sometimes just setting that out directly to the student can make a really, really big difference, because people need to know that they feel comfortable in a particular environment, because as soon as you have what's known as this affective filter, as soon as you have this, it's very hard for the student, because if they feel nervous or shy or anything, they're obviously completely valid feelings, but then it's going to really impact on the way that they are able to communicate and to absorb new information, new ideas. So I think trying to create this sort of environment where you can explain to me, it's okay, you're allowed to make mistakes, we're not going to laugh at you, we're not going to make fun of you. As soon as they feel more comfortable like this, it will take time. It's not just going to be like a switch and suddenly they start communicating, but when they get this idea that it's okay to be here, it's okay to feel comfortable, they will slowly start to almost like to trust you more, let's say, and then over time it will become better. But sometimes it can be a slow process. Sometimes it can take weeks or months to encourage somebody to come out of their shell and to start communicating and to realize that actually you do want to listen to them, you do want to hear what they have to say. And for some people that can be an unusual experience, that to have someone actually wanting to listen to them.
I deliberately put in our first sort of introduction lesson a section where the student has to teach the teacher how to say some greetings in Ukrainian, just to show them that we're just as terrible at pronouncing Ukrainian words, and you're trying to teach your mouth to do a whole different language, a whole different set of sounds. So that's one way that we try to kind of break the ice at the very start of the sessions.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful idea, because again, there is often this conception, or this preconception probably is a better word, that there is almost like a hierarchy. It's like the teacher is above the student. And again, I think this does come back from educational processes and everything else. But yeah, doing an activity like that is a wonderful idea, because then it brings the teacher down to your level. It's kind of like, we are the same. I'm not superior, I'm not better. This is like an informational exchange, I guess we can describe it as. And so it's kind of like we don't speak Ukrainian very well, we don't speak another language very well, and that's okay. We can help each other almost as we go through this. And
also because a lot of us aren't teachers, actually. We were fluent in English. So
yeah, but again, that's just because a person doesn't have a TEFL qualification or anything like this, it doesn't mean that you can't share ideas. It doesn't mean that you can't give some insight into how we understand the language, because even even just being in that environment is hugely beneficial. And if it's just purely, for listening skills or for speaking skills, it is a good thing to have. And, to have this opportunity available, it's marvelous, really. It's a wonderful, wonderful idea. Yeah.
Vit, how did you learn at school versus after school?
Oh, actually, I had very proficient teachers at school, so
That's good.
the most of my English is from the most grammar is from school. I have forgotten much in some years as I didn't practice English. Yeah, and then self-education came, and that was the 2/3 or like 1/3 of English learning. Like 2/3 was at school, actually.
Yeah. What overwhelmingly we find when we are talking to our students is that they did all of the grammar and the vocabulary at school, but they just didn't have time, didn't have anybody to practice with. So that's why we think that this is such a cool opportunity for both the mentors to do something really rewarding and the students to just practice talking with someone. It's not a lesson. It's not, you don't have a whiteboard and yeah.
You don't have grades.
No grades.
Exactly. Yeah.
No pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to get your 12 points, isn't it, in the Ukrainian system, as I recall. But but that's very true, because I mean that kind of tallies with my own experience as well. That Ukrainians now, well, almost all of them, they have to study English at school. It is a compulsory subject, so most of them do have a fundamental knowledge of the language anyway. But yeah, a lot of the lessons, at least from my students' experience, they're not about communication, which in my view is the most important part of language. They were very theoretical, very grammatically based, and so they don't often have the opportunity, as you've highlighted, to just to use the language, just to be able to speak and to communicate, and being able to unlock those kind of ideas by being able to communicate with a native speaker. It's like I said, it's really going to be beneficial, and also as well for the mentors to be able to find out a little bit more about to find out about Ukrainian culture, which may be, maybe they don't know that much about Ukraine and the nation. It can be wonderful in both directions, to find out more about each other as well, to make sort of a personal connection.
Let's try and end on something positive. Do you have a good a good English language joke for us?
An English language? Oh my God. Okay, you can just have one. Someone like two men walk into a bar. You would have thought one of them would have noticed.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to meet you. I can't wait to put this podcast together. Vit, was there anything you wanted to say before we sign off?
No, that's it. I just wanted to thank Daniel for a great conversation. It was very interesting and optimistic, I can say.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I wish your mentors and students and the project every success as you go forward, which I have no doubt it will be.